know
I
that
will walk around.
they can hear you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Marna, for your nice introduction a couple of minutes ago. And thank you for the invitation to be here. Maybe also a special welcome to the Belgian students from Hasselt. And to also Karen from Lissabon, who's also a mediator in Stellenbosch here. And to some Belgian mediators who are following on Teams. So, hello to all. I don't know if they can see me, probably if I'm around here.
Around the,
Then they should see me. Marna has asked me to talk about an hour and a half, 30 minutes of Q&A. So, obviously, that should not forbid you to ask questions while I'm talking. And maybe I will try to be a bit briefer than an hour. Although there's so many things to say about this fascinating field. And Marna, also thank you very much for that, Marna. I must say I would love to be in your class. It's you have a great setup, you have a very warm approach to it, and I think that's very important. You also made a beautiful note based on this article that was in Dutch, and I was assuming that Dutch and Afrikaans, but I read Afrikaans, but probably Dutch is a bit more difficult. But this article was basically a summary of the book I wrote in 24, Mediation, New Language for Polarized World. And so, obviously I could, since this is the first class, do a basic introduction into mediation, but that's not the goal. What I did, and I really was impressed, Marna, that you, based on my article, made such a beautiful note, sent it to the students. So I will be assuming, like in my classes in the US, that you have all read that. And she also sent my TEDx talk on dialogue and new language. But based on that, Marna gave a beautiful title, and I decided to kind of build my talk around that title and take all of the elements of the title and try to walk you through some thoughts in a journey in mediation land, but also broader than that, conflict management land, and maybe even broader than that, the land of human connection. And so the title that Marna makes, not my credit, it's Marna's. And by the way, she also asked me if I had PowerPoint, and I must honestly say that in most of my teaching, except in the US, I rarely use PowerPoints, and it was a word of a colleague from Haifa University at a conference here in Stellenbosch in the Spear Hotel in 2011. I was giving 2 lectures there. It was the International Conference of the International Association of Conflict Management, IACM. And at one of the sessions, a colleague from Haifa University gave his lecture, and he said, I don't have a PowerPoint because I want to make a point. And so I used to kind of copy that phrase. But that has been, that I have been thinking what I was going to say, basically building on the title that Marna has given. And so the title, I will repeat it, is Transforming Polarization, the role of mediation in reframing conflict narratives. And so that's a whole mouthful, and I will basically have 2 parts in my thoughts with you. Part 1 will be more expected on conflict management and mediation. And then in part 2, I will ask you, and I will tell you about some recent insights that I'm working on, which is like a preliminary question to mediation and to dialogue. And that will be about where I used to, until very recently, focus very much on how can we enhance dialogue in a polarized world through the skills, and I used mediation as the new language, as a language or as a skill set that you can learn to again find that new language. That new, I should probably be here for the Teams people, so I am. So the médiation naturelle, the natural mediation, is the language of connection. Even primates, monkeys, as the Frans de Waal research has demonstrated, primates can demonstrate empathy. And there's lots of research on also how fairness is based on reciprocity, how fairness is based on social comparison. You can find on YouTube the clips of the capuchin monkeys where they get cucumbers and then they do something, they get cucumbers, and they do that all the time. And all of a sudden he's out of cucumbers and he gives one of the monkeys grapes. And then the cucumbers are filled up again, and then the neighbor of that monkey gets cucumbers again, and he takes a cucumber and throws it away because it's unfair. And so empathy and the natural mediation is something that is ingrained in our DNA and also in the animals we originate from and we come from. So it's a very big core thing in us. So, and I thought mediation as a skill set is a vehicle to kind of teach us again how we could find back that old language that we've clearly, in a polarized world, forgotten how to speak it. And the part 2 insight will be, and I'm working also on a book with my brother who is a sociologist, where that element is really central. And it is that before we even can use the skills that we could learn through mediation. Yeah. I'm used to all graphs, and now I kind of stuck here. So the fact that we engage in a dialogue and we try to use this skill set, the preliminary issue now that I'm working on is, maybe we have forgotten in this polarized world that we should first think about how can we set the stage for a dialogue. I've always been assuming with my skill set we can just go in and we will have a dialogue. And now I'm thinking that we must do much more work and much more efforts to first kind of clear the sky and make sure there is a context that is set in order to have a dialogue and start to apply your skills. That will be in part 2, if I ever get there, because I'm used to talk a lot. So part 1, the traditional approach, where the first element of the title of Morna that I take is the last word, conflict. And, can anyone give me an example, briefly, not a long story, of a recent conflict you had? Yeah.
Yeah. In my workplace, between 2 different departments, they're having a conflict in deciding how to interpret the delegations that apply to the organization in order to take a decision.
Exactly. They have a different opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a very good example because it's demonstrating that conflict is about differences, different views, different perspectives, different opinions. I have constant conflicts with myself. I'm not a modern person. And so the conflict of how do I get up is really a real conflict. And you may laugh and say, well, that's not a conflict. It is. And in many situations, you go out with friends and one wants to go to the bistro, the wine glass, and another one wants to go to the wine house. That is a conflict. And you will say that is not a conflict because there's no negativity. Well, that is the first really important element in conflict management. And I do a lot of work in family dynamics with families who prepare the next generation. And I try to help families understand that the conflicts between them, the differences of opinions and perspectives, are an enrichment for their business and their family. So if you think about it, we have a way too negative view on conflict. I tell families, and when I use PowerPoints, I pop up a bottle of champagne, celebrate conflict. Because conflict is what makes you a human being. If there would be no conflict, if there would be no different opinion, perspective, we would not be human beings. It would be pretty boring. We would all want to go eat Chinese, Italian, whatever. No, conflict is part of our identity, personality. That's why also the intersectionality deals with the many layers of your identity, and they may be in conflict often within yourself and with others. So when you look at the etymology of conflict, in Latin, cum fligere. Fligere is beat, that's negative. But cum is together. The Chinese use two signs for the word conflict. One sign is threat, the other one is opportunity. So I think we should embrace our differences, and that's where the listening comes in, obviously, and use conflicts as an opportunity to strengthen our connection, to listen to each other, to be enriched by different opinions and views, and hence become a more whole person. So in families, we really train them to deal with conflicts and to have different opinions and to have this beautiful skill of empathetic listening, to respectfully have different opinions. But of course, conflicts have this negative resonation because very often we, from our view and our perspective, we think that is how it should be. We push it and the other one does the same, and it may become a dispute. So I kind of differentiate between conflicts and disputes. And a dispute is where you start to blame the other and eventually claiming that you're right, etc. And that's where we are then at this fascinating field of conflict management that I will touch upon in a second. But then first I need to go to the second word, which is the polarization. The polarization has been increasing in a dramatic way in the last decades in our societies. It stems from the evolution of very straightforward individualism, egoism, losing of collective feeling, and I think it is absolutely part of or caused by the completely derailed capitalistic system where our society, since obviously the Renaissance in 1600, but it has taken an enormous increase since 1975. The last decades have been a incredible evolution in inequality, in unfair society, and that has obviously brought, part of it has brought the polarization. I am right. I, and I don't see my bias. I see how it is. Thich Nhat Hanh, the fantastic Buddhist master who brought mindfulness to our world, who passed away in 21, whom I have not known directly, but one of his pupils, a nun, was one of my teaching assistants at Harvard Law School. He was studying at the Harvard Divinity School, so I know Thich Nhat Hanh for many years through her stories. And he says perception is deception. We have a closed mind, and that closed mind, that is the mind that says you are right because you are you and you are fantastic. You are constantly confirmed in that individualistic deception, and that has taken a huge flight since 2006, the dramatic, really dramatic invention of social media. That has brought us so many incredibly devastating things and impact on our human development and connection, but it has also brought kind of a boost to polarization. Because Mana already mentioned AI, the algorithms are, and now 20 years later, much more sophisticated than in 2006, but they are a constant confirmation bias booster. And so when perception is deception and you are constantly in this bias through social media, and it's really a devilish system, you get constant confirmation bias, and you are so right. And the other one is so damn wrong. And that's where the polarization obviously comes from. And then we start from that conviction, we start to blame the others. And we start to think of them as, at some point, they are not like us, but then, because of the confirmation bias and I'm so right, we start to demonize other people, the other group. And that's where tribalism, which is obviously in human nature, humans are looking for security, and the other that is not part of the group, the tribe, the clan, is unsafe, is threatening. And so that tribalism and the demonization of people, I have been teaching since 20 years at Harvard Law School, and I have seen from 2007 until now how the polarization in society there between Republicans and Democrats has taken an evolution that I thought was inconceivable. That it is really unimaginable how these worlds are apart. And so that polarization means that there is no listening, we are just arguing, and we try to persuade the other because I'm so right. And there comes the metaphor that I use to maybe understand why even you and I are victims of this evolution of polarization and of this individualistic view on how right we are. And I demonstrate that with the silly farmer metaphor. If you think about, and also just think about now you're sitting here and you're listening, but you're not really listening because there's constantly comment in your head. So that's, and if there's only one voice, that's normal. If there's more, you might consider further examination. If you have no voice, and you say, I have no voice, that's your voice, obviously. You all have an inner voice. And the inner voice blocks you from really connecting with the other person and from really listening to them. And we see that when we engage with another person, that's why I try not to use the word discussion or debate, but I try to use dialogue, because that would be real listening. Very often when we engage with someone else, that listening to the other is blurred by our own thoughts, and we're already preparing our answer, or we're daydreaming, or we're commenting, and we're judging. We're so often judging. We are so damn biased. It's incredible. Read Thinking Fast and Slow of Kahneman and Tversky. It's an interesting popularization of their research. You should read it just to get the humility of knowing that you cannot escape the bias. And that is one thing. I wrote an article on biases for mediators and on the need for mediators to de-bias, and I developed a little model how they can do that. Maybe we can talk about that. There's a lot of, and I will say that already now, and I don't know if you will have time to discuss that, but in Belgium, where there's a lot of discussion in the profession, I've already said that some lectures, beyond lawyers' arrogance, there's only one profession that I know that is even more arrogant, and that's mediators. There is a very strong guru dogmatic view with some mediators, and I will later on try to convince you that we should not accept that, and we should really keep an open mind.
Prof, can you just repeat the name of the writers of the bias?
Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Okay.
The book is by Daniel Kahneman, but I always mention Amos Tversky because all the research was done by Kahneman and Tversky together. They wrote a lot of publications. And then Tversky died, and 2 years later Kahneman got the Nobel Prize for economics.
Oh.
I thought it was so unfair to this poor deceased scientist that I always mention him in all my publications and in all my lectures. I will never talk about Kahneman alone. I always talk about Kahneman and Tversky. But the book, you will not find it under the title of both. It's Kahneman who then wrote the book, and it's a thinking fast and slow. There's a really interesting material, and you will probably have heard about System 1, System 2, and so on. And so, again, you're not really listening, but mediation and the skills can help us and learn how to better listen. Yet, I was introducing the silly farmer because the assumption is that when we want to convince someone else because I'm so right, and we want to persuade the other, we think we should argue, we should give arguments, we should. And one of the things, I'm also a negotiator, I negotiate a lot. And in a negotiation, I would never ever start with giving my arguments. I would always invite and listen to the other. Because there's no way you could ever convince someone or have a dialogue, a collaborative conversation, if you start persuading. And yet, that is what we do very often. And that's the silly farmer. And so every time you feel like persuading or convincing, think about the silly farmer. You are walking in a very nice landscape, and there's land everywhere, and there's farmers working. But it's winter, and it's not winter like in South Africa where you can sit on a terrace 20 degrees in the sun, and like I do with a coffee and smoke a cigar. No, it's a real winter. It's a real winter where the land is frozen and there's snow. Okay? And so, in that winter, you are walking and you see on a field a farmer. And he's throwing seeds constantly. And you stop, you look from far. What is he doing? You don't have binoculars, but you look and you approach. You go on the land, on the ice, and you approach him, and he's still throwing seeds. And you go to the farmer and you say, "Hello, Mr. Farmer, what are you doing?" "Oh, don't you see it? I'm throwing seeds so that my plants or my flowers or whatever he's doing can grow." And you say, "But Mr. Farmer, that's not possible. It's frozen." "Oh, no problem." And he continues. I think you will all agree, I'm not that expert in the agricultural business, but I think you will agree that that is a silly farmer. And that's us. We are constantly throwing seeds, arguments to other people, hoping that something will grow, that we will convince them. So the whole skill of active listening and demonstrating empathy to someone else, and I already say now, because I I should not forget it, empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is not agreeing with someone. Empathy is demonstrating that you can see the world through their eyes, through their perspective. My teacher and mentor and later colleague and friend at Harvard Law School, Bob Mnookin, who wrote the book Beyond Living on Conversation, he is Jewish, and he told me when I was a student that he could demonstrate empathy to a Nazi SS officer who opens the gas chamber. That clearly is not sympathy and is not agreement. It is simply saying that that person in that situation, on that moment, is a human being with a perspective, with the whole baggage that brings him to do something inhuman. Yet, you can demonstrate empathy, that you can understand the perspective, and then obviously, luckily in mediation, situations are not that devastating, that you can demonstrate empathy for how they look at the world, their anxieties, their fears, their dreams, their expectations, and so on. So in that sense, it's a very powerful thing. And remember the silly farmer, every time that you want to argue, stop and give empathy. Shut up your inner voice. Because without shutting up your inner voice, you will not be able to give empathy. It's very hard to be empathetic. I had some discussions with the famous mediator in Los Angeles, Gary Friedman, who says, empathy is a skill from the heart. Well then, if that is true, and he says it's something that is natural, you're born with it or not, that is very bad news if he's right. Especially for lawyers.
Yeah.
So I think, and with me a lot of other authors like my friend Bob Mnookin, think that empathy is a cognitive skill you can learn. And you can learn to be genuinely interested in the perspective of someone else. My daughter Charlotte sometimes says, Dad, you only demonstrate empathy when you can make money of it. That was in a moment that she was not so happy with me. And I agree that I feel that you should not constantly be in empathy, otherwise it would drive you nuts. Because really be empathetic is really be with the other person, forget about your own thought, judgment. That's why being a mediator is taking a lot of energy. Because one of the concepts is multiple partiality. You are partially connected with each one of the parties on the same connection level. So you're not impartial like a judge, because that impartial means you're above. Multiple partiality is you're amongst them, and you connect with each of them with empathy. Whoa, that takes a lot of energy, especially if you, because of your biases, sometimes unconscious biases, have more sympathy for the woman in the divorce than for the husband. And then you have to be neutral, not impartial, but multiple partial, with empathy, and work on your biases. It's a hell of a job. Sometimes people say, the whole thing of active listening, communication, empathy, these are soft skills. I always tell people, you're so wrong. I have been a partner in a law firm where the hot shots were M&A lawyers and international tax lawyers, and that were the so-called hard skills. I told a big M&A partner, my dear friend, that are the soft skills. It's easy peasy. M&A. Okay, you make a lot of money and you feel important, but it's very easy. The hard skills are empathy and active listening. That's where a lot of work is to be done. That's where your energy has to come from. And so I don't call it hard skills, I call it human skills. Not soft skills, but human skills. Okay. Then we go to word number 3. The first word in Marna's title. Transforming. So we already had conflict. we had polarization, and now we have transforming. And the idea was transforming polarization with mediation as a toolkit to reframe conflict narratives. That was it, right? And so the transforming through using mediation could be by reframing narratives, as Mana has suggested. And I think that's really true. Mediation, and I will say a little bit more about the context and the skill set, but both in negotiation, mediation, and I would say in life, one of the most interesting skills you can have is to reframe. Because, remember what I said, I think there are people on the teams that should put on their mute.
If you can just all mute
These
yourself.
People, please mute.
I think it's all
Or you have a question? Sorry.
Do you have a question?
Do you have a question? Can we not mute them?
I'm going to try.
Okay, so let me go back.
I muted.
You muted? Yeah, that's better. So, what I was saying is reframing is a very important skill. Remember, your perception and your biases are kind of misleading you to think that whatever you feel, see, experience is the truth. That's how it is. That's the reality. And when you're in disputes, people are caught in that tunnel vision. A mediator, and mediation in itself, can help reframe. That means see it from a different perspective, look at it from a different angle, and then see a completely new world. Very often, also in negotiation, the thing I'm doing with my client is constantly looking for other views, reframe. How can I look at it from a different side? By the way, you can also, and that's how you can work against your biases, reframe someone else. If I look at you, and I would be now judging through biases because of impressions coming, I could reframe by saying, look, he is a diamond with 1,000 facets. I see one or two. There are 900 and so on others. If I would look at him from other perspectives of the diamond, I could see something totally different. That's reframing, constantly. And so, when Marna says reframing the narrative, you're story people tell stories to themselves all the time. If you can reframe the narrative, look at it from a different side, from another perspective, from a different angle, you may create a new perspective, a new world, a solution eventually for the dispute. And there, I think, a very interesting tool is what we call the 3 shifts in dealing with what happened. It's something I use a lot as mediator and as negotiator, by the way. Because we will see in a second, but I will already tell you now, mediation is basically nothing else than facilitating the negotiation between parties who are not able to negotiate or communicate in a constructive way anymore. So all concepts and insights from negotiation theory and problem-solving negotiation are constantly used by mediators, because basically the mediator is helping the negotiation and facilitating that. But before that, I want to give you a quick insight in these 3 shifts, just to maybe also as a tool that you could use whenever you are stuck in a situation. The first one is remember that how you see things, your truth is just one perception, and that the other may have different perceptions. So that's the shift from my truth to just a perception. That's an incredibly powerful one, because if you share that with someone you have a dispute with, and they also admit, oh my God, you can see it completely differently, that's your reframing, you already feel a connection. The second one is a really important one, it also relates to our biases. It is, and you probably know it from psychology, the attribution error or attribution bias. And this is very powerful. I will give an example and you will immediately understand it. You are a young mother and your baby girl is in the creche, we say, I don't know the word in English, where you...
preschool or play school.
Preschool, yeah, something like that. She's 2 years old. And she's there, and they close at 7. And if you're not there at 7, they don't eat, they are mad and they fine you. And you also, you pay a fine, but also you kind of get this warning that if this happens again, so it's not good for your reputation. Alright, so you are driving on the highway in the morning. And everything is fine, you go to your work, you just dropped off your baby girl at the preschool, and 9 o'clock you have to be at the office, and all of a sudden, on the left lane, a Porsche is coming very fast, and there's an exit, and you are driving very nicely in your nice car, listening to nice music, and that Porsche, bam, and he cuts you to take the exit. What will be your inner comments? It will be probably not very nice things about this guy. Okay. You have a nice day at the office, a lot of work, and in the evening you have to pick up your little, I will call it Charlotte, my daughter. And so, but right before you leave, your boss is there, he wants, and I have to go out and I have to do this, do that. He's not a very good boss, he pushes you and you're late. So you're driving on the highway, you're looking on your watch, 7 o'clock is approaching, you are speeding up, you drive in the middle lane, and you're speeding up, there are cars on the right lane, and all of a sudden, you have to take the exit. Oh my God, boom, and you cut off another car. What will be your comment now? Your comment will be, oh, I'm so sorry, but I need to pick up my baby girl. So this is what happens all the time. When you do something, you have good intentions. When someone else does something, they have bad intentions. The attributional error is that we always attribute positive things to ourselves and negativity to the other. And so, because there's a blind spot, you do something, you know what you do, so you know your intention, I want to pick up Charlotte, but you don't know what the impact is on the other person. Vice versa, someone else does something, the Porsche, you don't know what his or her intentions were, but you know the impact on you. Bad. Jerk. Okay? Well, the good news is there's not many people who get up in the morning and while they are brushing their teeth, looking themselves in the mirror and say, who am I going to screw today? There's not many, there are some psychopaths and so on, but few people have bad intentions. Few people really have this drive to hurt someone else. So, if you can shift from intent to impact, if you can see the negative impact on you and think about the intentions that might be different than what you attribute, you're already a step further. That's also the mediator does, helping people to see that. Yes?
Can you do mediation if someone has bad intentions?
Well, the thing is, yeah, of course, there's a lot of discussion on mediation in good faith, and do they use mediation as a trick in their strategy? And there's also the negative roles of lawyers, attorneys. That's a big problem. Attorneys is a profession where the ethical standards all over the world are not what they should be. And as a professor of law, I'm constantly fighting against that, but you know, it is what it is. So absolutely, it is possible that people come in with bad intentions, but a good mediator can, in the process, by asking questions, by going through their intentions, by also putting, put your money where your mouth is. When you say something, do you mean it? And at some point, if the mediator feels this is not sincere, you can question that. You could do a caucus and say, what is going on here? So there are ways to deal with that. I mean, I was appointed by the Court of Appeal of Amsterdam in a lost case that was in a family for 10 years, a big fight in the company, and there was lots of bad intentions. And so you need patience, you need a structured approach, you need to be very transparent, you need as a mediator also to have a certain posture, like, okay, I will help you, I will try, but give them the accountability. I always tell the people, it's your shit, not mine. So whatever you do, you're accountable. If you, the one who had certainly bad intentions, there was one of the parties, I told him, it's fine. If you don't want this to succeed, okay, let's stop it. But not doing anything is also a decision, and you will have to live by the consequences. For instance, not see your grandchildren for another 10 years again. So it's about a process, but this is a topic we can give a lecture on, so I will not dive into it more, but you're absolutely right. It is a very important issue, and a mediator should never be naive. You must be a professional who really, it's a very difficult job, because there's a lot going on, and you're dealing with human beings, which is the most unpredictable and most complicated context you can have. That's why it is so much more complicated than the technicalities of an M&A deal. Okay, good question, thank you. The last shift is from blame to contribution. Helping the parties to understand that while they are blaming the other, they might also maybe think a second of how they contributed to the problem. And if you share the contributions, very often you can find a solution in working together, especially in long-term relationships. What can we now do differently? What can you do differently? What can I do differently to avoid this happening again? And so working on joint contribution can be very helpful. Before I go to part 2, because the time flies, I want to say something technical about mediation. I've touched upon some points, but I want to make sure, because this is a course on mediation, that you already know now. First, mediation is the facilitation of negotiations. It's in principle facilitative. It means that you are a neutral, independent, multiple, partial, connected with everyone, but that you are not bringing the solution, that you're helping the people to find the solution themselves. 2, it's always voluntary, so they can step out, they can bail out. That's why with bad intentions, you should obviously hold them accountable. 3, what I said already, the parties own the conflict, and you need to give them that ownership and help them take the responsibility. And also 4, it's always confidential. Okay, so that being said, mediation in its pure form of facilitated mediation, is just one element of conflict management in a big array of possibilities. What I kind of reproach to some mediators in Belgium and the Netherlands, that I then call arrogant, is that their approach is there's only one solution, and that's facilitated mediation. That's absolutely nonsense. I'm a scholar of conflict management. And dispute management. I want to think about how can we help people to find a way to manage their conflict in the best possible way. It's possible that we don't have to look for a solution. It's about managing the conflict, and my ambition is to bring them in a place that they are better off tomorrow than they were before they met. I don't have high ambitions. It's not that I want to create world peace or hallelujah among them. It's just make it a little bit better. And then you need to think about how many variables there are. The parties, the timing, the type of conflict or dispute. It's all very complicated and unpredictable. So, and I will be very brief on this, but in my book and in an article I've made the argument for process pluralism. You need to look at it and see together with the parties what would be the best way to manage this particular conflict at this moment. That means, and that's what I call external process pluralism. That's from the outset when you decide what route will we take. It could be, I've had situations where I say, look, I think, and it's a very delicate thing to say, because if one of the parties is in a personal problem, there should be first some personal development, coaching, and even therapy done. I've had that in families where before we start the negotiation of the family deal, we have people, and I've had a lot of experience with dealing with, I don't do therapy, I don't do coaching, but I do personal development, and I've helped people together with a psychiatrist to be empowered in a conversation. Very complicated, very delicate. Don't do it if you're young and fresh in the field, because that's also something that mediators should never forget. Lawyers just play with clients' money. Mediators play with their soul and emotions. Your responsibility is huge. Don't take it lightly. You're coming very close to what a doctor does, to healing. It's not something to be taken lightly, and it is taken too lightly very often in the profession. So that is really an important warning. On that side of therapy, coaching, personal development, but on the other side, you could go to more task-oriented solving attitudes. Very often, evaluative mediation is done by lawyers, and there's a lot of discussion, lawyers are pushing too much, etc. And then there's many other forms, case settlement, bridging, MEDAR, ARPMED. I will not go into that, that is a topic in itself. But what is important is that I've added in that recent article internal process pluralism. That is, once you decide, and very often that is what we do, and obviously another way is collaborative negotiation. You don't need necessarily a mediator, but if parties are not able to have a constructive conversation, and the attorneys, who are often putting the conflict even in a worse situation, so fueling up, the lawyers also are not able to collaboratively negotiate, then you need a mediator. And the starting position very often at the outset is facilitated mediation. But you should be flexible in the course of the conflict or the dispute. People change. The situation changes. There's new elements. The world changes. The geopolitical situation changes. That has an impact. I've had mediations where there were huge disputes on the valuation of a big stock portfolio and private equity investments. And then, bam, there is some crazy guy with a red tie, and the whole thing changes. That is what happens. That is the world. Change. We don't like change as human beings, but change is of the essence. As a mediator, you need to navigate and you need to be flexible. And so your internal pluralism is that you need to see whether at some moments there may be a need for evaluative mediation. In the case, the lost case of the Court of Appeal of Amsterdam, that we said it, there has been an agreement. At some point, there was such a crazy claim, legally, and this was technical inheritance law. I'm a professor in inheritance law. So the lawyers asked me, Professor, could you give your professional opinion of what the court would decide? I asked the parties, look, what I ask here is out of my role as a facilitative mediator. Are you willing to give me permission to now step? And that's also transparency. You always structure the process, you're transparent, you say what you do, and I just said, is it okay I put on the hat of evaluative mediator? The party said yes, and I gave my opinion, and that element has been part of coming to a solution. I've had situations where, and that's MEDAR, where they ask, can you arbitrate that single point of discussion? And then we make a contract, we all agree, I arbitrate, it's decided, and they can continue with the rest. So flexibility and adapting is key. So if you're a dogmatic guru of facilitating mediation, you are a bad mediator, because you're already demonstrating the bias. Because you're biased in favor of one conflict management approach. And the biases are enormous. That's why I try to advocate for co-mediation, a lawyer and a psychologist or a communication specialist. But then obviously, in small cases, that's too expensive. So what you then have to do, that's where I use the term in that article, you need a mediator buddy. If you're a solo mediator and you're doing a case, in mediation we have intervisions. You've done cases and then twice or three times a year you do an intervision, one full day with colleagues. I advocate for intervision during the case. That has not to be expensive. It can be 15 minutes, but that you call your buddy and say, I'm doing this is my feeling, what do you think? So that's helping you to de-bias. Mediator buddy. Okay, time is running, so I come to my closing, which is my part 2. And my part 2 is close to my heart, because if you think about what we see now, I've tried to demonstrate that through mediation and the language of mediation, and I've not been able to deal with the technicality of active listening, but it's IPA, it's inquiry with open questions, paraphrase what you hear, and acknowledge the feelings. And to do that, you need to be in the moment and the modus of empathy. Shut up your inner voice. That's it. We work in my course at Harvard, which is 3 weeks every day from 9 to 5. Every day prepared, every day they have to write a paper, constant, it's a marathon. They have to do a lot of cases where we train active listening. So there's a lot to learn, but it's something, it's a live learning thing. I will die, I always say in February 2061, turning 97 then. Even at that moment, I will still be learning to be more in empathy and active listening. It's never done. It's a fantastic human skill that you always can develop better. So now what is my second part? That is that preliminary to all of these skills, preliminary to mediation as a vehicle to learn to speak a new language, the language of empathy and emotions, there must be something we are missing preliminary to that, because the polarization is continuing and is aggravating in the world. So basically, we are doing something wrong. I was asking myself, what am I missing? Mediation has the power, the intrinsic force to help us, to learn the language, to become again human beings who speak la médiation naturelle, and still we don't do it. Mediation could learn as a language for a real dialogue, where you can enrich me and I can enrich you. I may be wrong or partially wrong. You may give me a perspective that I feel like the dialogue is your water and my water. We listen, open-minded, and a bit of your water in mine and a bit of my water in yours, and there's a new perspective, there's a new world. That's dialogue. That's being enriched. And we don't do it. Or we don't, well, we try, but let's be honest, we don't have really fantastic results if you look into the world. And I think in order for the skills to have a chance, we need to find, and that's the preliminary condition, a common ground. We need to be more attentive to working on our own attitude and our mindset. And that means, and I really think this is more than just words, we need to find our common humanity again, and we need to make connections. If I call the new language EEE, Esperanto, new language, of emotions and empathy, then you can only do that through sincere personal connections. Thich Nhat Hanh says, he doesn't talk about active listening. He doesn't talk about empathetic listening. He talks about deep listening. He talks about making the deep human connection without judging, listening to the other human being and see the other as a human being. And I think I've had a lot of occasions in mediation and negotiation where I felt this magic moment where someone of the parties that was really wronged or hurt now felt acknowledged. That's where you build that moment of connection. And when I negotiate with hotshot, macho, alpha male lawyers, and 90% of them have these features, what I do, in order not to be intimidated, because they use intimidating, difficult tactics, I look at them and I prepare myself to look at them as a human being and trying to make a connection on a deeper level and seeing in them just what is an alpha male. That is a very insecure human being who puts on a big harness to show how important he is and to protect himself. So I see, and sometimes I've said it to some of these guys. I say, afterwards, after we made a deal, I told them, the little birdie in the big hotshot guy is craving for acknowledgement, just as any other human being. We are all the same on that deeper level. And that, I think, is absolutely key to connect again with this more holistic or animistic or Buddhist way of looking at the world in the connection with other human beings, that we are all interdependent, that we are connected, that we are all part. You know, the Buddhists say we are all cupcakes from the same dough. We all come from the same energy. And I think you can say, well, is that not a bit too much emotional? I think if your mindset, if your attitude, if you really as a mediator try to interconnect in this deep listening, the impact you will have on the parties is fabulous. I never understood in the Bible the words of Jesus saying, love thy enemy as thyself. I never understood that until I started to understand Buddhism, where the idea is we are all interconnected, coming from the same energy, and then it simply means love thy enemy as thyself, because he is you. You are connected. And I would really like to end with a beautiful poem, and then I'm just in the hour, of Thich Nhat Hanh, that I think is, but this is, you know, now we're far from the hotshot law. We're now in the world of deep connection and interconnection. But really honestly, I think, and that is what I will develop in my book, if we set the stage before we, that's why I said it's preliminary, before you go into the dialogue, before you go into the mediation, before you go into speaking of the language with the skills, you set the stage of honest interconnection, inter-essence, be part of the same energy, and if with that mindset, I think you might be able to create some magic. And that is the poem of Thich Nhat Hanh. It's incredible. Please call me by my true names. Don't say that I will depart tomorrow. Even today I am still arriving. Look deeply. Every second I'm arriving to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with still fragile wings, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that is alive. I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river. I am the bird that swoops down to swallow the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond. And I am the grass snake that silently feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee in a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands. And I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the 4 oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and my laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true name, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. And that, my dear students, is the key. Compassion. Thank you. And now I'm open to all kinds of questions, technical or less technical. Whatever you like to ask me or comment, I'm happy to engage in a dialogue with you.
So, over to you, please. I know this is probably feeling energizing but also overwhelming, because to me what is clear from this is maybe you thought you picked the mediation course because it is a soft option, but I think it should be clear it's not. It's going to take more from you in terms of maybe investing emotionally, you know, in really critically thinking about, to me, what is what I picked up is how do we balance our empathy and neutrality and keep sane without becoming overwhelmed. That on the one side. So what do you do or recommend? And also from a practical perspective, in terms of cost effectiveness, and also in a country like South Africa, where access to justice is already problematic because of costs and various other things, how do you keep it so that it doesn't spiral? I suppose it's easy to do a mediation when well, not easy, but when there's lots of money and clients that can afford it, if there ain't.
Yeah, I thank you, Marna. Your first question is very close to my heart, because it is absolutely and also you comment on how negotiation and mediation are hard skills and it is transformative. You will become another professional and another human being if you take this serious and if you work on it. Introspection is not something lawyers often do, but mediators do it more. And so the whole thing, how to keep not only your biases, but yourself in a space where you're professional, where you're doing what you should do, where all the elements, I think, and beyond mediation, but in the field of mediation, it's especially needed because it takes so much energy from you, right? And what I do is, and you can probably suspect it since I am a fan of Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhism, I do a lot of mindfulness and meditation. And not in the sense of meditation that some people have an app on their iPhone and then they say 3 times a week I do 20 minutes of meditation or every morning. No, I meditate constantly because, as the Buddhist monks teach you, meditation starts with being in the now with conscious deep breathing. I've practiced, I'm really good at breathing, and it's really something I do more than 100 or 200 times a day. Constantly be in the moment. I've been helped 15 years ago, I got type 1 diabetes, this is an insulin pump, and I check my pump constantly because it's 24/7 intrusive things. I can get a glucose drop, so when I give a lecture or when I teach, I always have to pump up myself to higher glucose because I could, also when I'm passionate or when I've had hypoglycemia, sugar drops, when I was reading papers of some of my Harvard students, and I was so excited that they were so good that I got a sugar drop. So I have constantly Coca-Cola in my backpack. So what does that mean? That means that every time I look at this, I'm reminded of my fragility. I'm reminded of my being just a very little birdie who is very happy that the medical science is so developed. And so that has helped me to be constantly mindful. Be in the now, deep breathing. And so that means if you feel, when you do a lot of introspection, you get to know your heart balance. You get also to know where your bias pop in. And so when I feel and I see some red flags, I would, even during mediation, say, let's take a humanitarian break and go to the restroom. It could be that I don't have to go to the restroom, that I just need to check in and to work on that. Every time I would go into mediation, I would prepare mindful. Every time I debrief mindful. So and my advice is, start with deep breathing. It helps you to be calm, to be in the moment, and it's free. You can, and start do mindful walking. When you go to the bathroom, do it mindfully. Every step connects you with the earth. When you take a cup of coffee, take a moment for when you're waiting at a traffic light. I think this is also, in terms of what I said, we need to work on our mentality and attitude to make that human connection. The more you do this, the more you honestly, sincerely try to connect. When I walk here from my house in the Redeveld Street, that's over there, to here, I try to connect with every being I see. A bird, a stone. And you would say, oh, is it crazy? No, it's just constantly practicing this mindful attitude. And if you do that, if you start to internalize it, it's incredible how calm you can stay in the heat of very nasty conflicts and mediations. So, and I think it's a very simple thing you can do, but I think you will feel the benefit very quickly. There's only one T between mediation and meditation. And they are very close. One of my Harvard students, Elizabeth Pijoff, has a practice now in New York, and she something with happiness, but she does compassionate meditation. That's why I ended with the word compassion. Practice your compassion. I am a white old man who is raised in a context where biases and judging is ingrained. So I'm still working on not judging. That means that's why I walk and try to connect with everything I see, because it's a constant practice of compassion. And by doing that, you become a better human being and a better mediator. So that's what I personally do, and there's, everyone can find their own ways, but the only right answer is the answer you can give for yourself, and that works for you. Yet I think it will always come down to be honest with yourself, look at yourself, and don't tell yourself lies. And that means that you accept your own vulnerabilities, your own weaknesses, and that you try to work on it, and that you're honest with it. The second question, and then I come to you. Absolutely true. I am very privileged to work, to be appointed or to work for in big cases where it's really not an issue to get paid. So, and then you could say, how can you translate that into a context where where resources are limited, and where you can, where maybe there's also not much time. I taught once a course, a long time ago, a negotiation course in the Netherlands with Larry Susskind of MIT. And Larry, I learned from him something that I since then have always applied, and that is go slow to go fast. And so even if I only have 1 hour, I will take in that 1 hour, I will try to think about time management in that 1 hour. If we have 1 hour to discuss and to help you, and remember my ambition is low, I want you to be in a better position than before we started.
So you don't want to necessarily have a concrete solution in terms
Not necessarily, it depends. But even if they say we need a solution because it's urgent, and we only have 1 hour, and we only have €200 or dollars to pay, okay, then, I probably would say my fees are higher. I would say I do it pro bono. I would say, because that's also something you can do. I've often done pro bono mediations. And so then you're not paid, but you do it because you want to help. But obviously, that's not a sustainable system. So that's not really an answer. The answer is, suppose your hour fee is $200, and they can pay that, and you only have 1 hour because it's urgent. Then apply Larry's method of go slow to go fast. That means you need to really think about your time management, and you really allocate to the parties. You say, tell me, they know that they don't have a lot of time, so everyone agrees. It's not you imposing on them. And then you agree on a schedule of 5 minutes, and then your skills of empathy come in. And to be honest, if the time is so tight and the resources are so tight, very often it brings parties in an attitude and a willingness to find a solution. And if you structure that well, and you give them not the stress of, we don't have a lot of time, no, you're calm. You behave like you have all the time of the world. You're zen. It's fine. Relax. And then, but you structure, I think you can do a lot of good. But I will be honest, the Court of Appeal Amsterdam case, without the resources to pay me, and without the time, they wouldn't have had a solution. But then, they were litigating for 10 years. Imagine how many fees they have paid to attorneys. I told them, and the lawyers agreed with me, that my fee, that was a considerable fee, was basically a bargain, because in 4 sessions we found an agreement for an intrinsic, very deep problem that they had been litigating between parents and children for 10 years. So, but you're absolutely right, it's something, so go slow to go fast. I think that would be my advice. Structure it and be calm yourself, but always a mediator who is not calm, a mediator who is not at peace. That's why you need to be mindful. You need to be at peace with yourself. You need to have your biases under control. You need to get your emotions relaxed and zen. If you feel like you would not be able to connect multiple partial with every party, because, and I'm a private lawyer, private law, so I will make one big caveat, that is criminal law. Like me, you have the restorative justice and the mediation in criminal cases, where you have a mediator between offender and victims. I'm not sure I will be able to do that. I'm not sure. This is for me, I've never done that. The only things I've done criminal is negotiations, where I was negotiating with the Attorney General, but that was in tax fraud and money laundering schemes. That was not in criminal cases where you rape someone or murder someone or a pedophile with children. I'm not sure. So I know for myself and from my emotions and my biases, how can I demonstrate empathy to be honest, what Bob Mnookin says about empathy as a Jewish person to the Nazi, I don't know if I would be able to do that. I think it's something as a mediator you need to be honest with yourself, and before you take a case you need to check with yourself, with your own biases and your emotions, and eventually not do the case and refer it to a colleague. Yes?
You talked about to set the stage for the mediation, and do you have a practical example to do that? So is it only the mindset of the mediator, or is it also that you have to prepare the client or maybe the room in which you will mediate?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but that's the setting the stage in the classical structural way. When I was talking about setting the stage preliminary to having a mediation or dialogue, that's more the more emotional mindset stuff. But also in the structural thing, obviously, like for a negotiation process, is a key dimension. So you need to think about, will I caucus or not? Caucus is be apart with each one of the parties. Will I set them all together? Where do I set them? How do I set up the room? Who will sit where? What about the counsels and the lawyers? There's a lot of processing to do, absolutely. And it's something you really have to think through and then discuss with the parties. You need to, that's also the same in negotiation, any process move you make should always be, also as a mediator, should be a suggestion. You say, look, I suggest we work that way and that way. As a mediator, obviously you don't have a lot of power, but you are not allowed to use that power because it's a voluntary process where the parties should drive the process, helped and facilitated by you. So you constantly give them suggestions. You say, how about, and obviously if you have a lot of experience and the parties know that, they go along, but you need to question and ask, are you okay with that? You need to read, if you see someone not reacting, you need to read the body language and say, are you okay with this? So that setting up is really important. There's a lot of discussion on process issues, like caucus is a big deal in the US. Presence of lawyers. What can they do? How should they behave? How can you intervene? There's a lot of, we didn't talk about it, I have a PhD who's working on that. You mentioned it, power imbalance. To what extent as a mediator do you need to intervene in the power imbalances? I've had a situation where the mediator in a divorce with the husband extremely dominant and the wife, the mediator called me and said, would you be willing, and she had discussed it with the parties, to not be the lawyer, but to sit alongside the woman to empower her and to rebalance. And so the man was a really dominant guy, a managing partner of a huge firm, and when the mediator suggested that, I thought it was very great of her. She felt, I have no impact on this guy. She was a woman and he looked at her as if she was like, you know, you mediator woman from a little law firm, I am the big guy. And he was really dominating his wife. It was a very toxic power dynamic. And so she said, she asked the guy, if I would ask Professor Rebecca to come and sit next to your wife and help her have the talks with you, would you agree with that? And he knows me, and he said, okay, I can deal with that. And so, and I did it. And we had several meetings where I was sitting next to the woman, and the woman and I were one party, and the man was one party, and the mediator mediated. So that was a very original, creative way to deal with the power imbalance. Yeah.
So I think my question is around the legislation of the profession. Like with what you know and having looked at various jurisdictions as to how they mediate, do you think there's true value without stifling the field of legislating? Because South Africa is now going that route. But it's so dynamic, it's so, there's quite a lot that's involved in it. So I don't know what your view is on that.
It's a very good question. It's we always say in Europe we have directives on mediation and of the European Union. The first country that legislated the hell out of it was Italy. It's a huge mediation legislation. There's almost no mediation there. Belgium has legislation 2005 and then a new bigger amended act in 2018. There's not much mediation. There is, but not really. The Netherlands, no legislation, huge mediation practice. So, to your point, legislation may encourage, legislation may regulate to make sure you have no damaging people in the profession, because people in conflict are very vulnerable and they will believe anything and anyone. So you need to, so that might be reasons, but in the Netherlands it's auto-regulated by mediation associations who give accreditations. So I would say a lot of legislation is often a sign of weakness. And on the other hand, it may be an encouragement and it may help. And also, I'm a fan of mandatory mediation. I think the access to justice does not is a free lunch ticket to go to court just like that. I think you need to deserve your access to the court. That means you need to demonstrate that you have tried in good faith to find a solution amicably. And so I am very much in favor of mandatory mediation, and therefore you would need legislation, obviously. I'm an attorney. The Order of Attorneys in Belgium hates me for this point of view, only for that. I've been a member of the Council of the Bar, and they said, why do you say that? Because I honestly feel that if we give people the chance, if we oblige them to at least sit in one meeting where a mediator can explain what he does, unknown is unloved. People don't know what it is. If you then have a good mediator, very often he can change the dynamics. So legislation to do that would be a good thing. Can I just, I forgot in answer, I come back to you, in reply to your question, I forgot one thing that is really important, because when you asked on setting the stage, I said, okay, we have the structural setting of the stage and the process, and then we refer to the more mindset thing and compassion. One thing that is really interesting is that there is research, but it's more on the medical field, and I was hoping that Elizabeth could do some experiments, but she did some with how having the parties before the negotiation of the mediation starts, having them for a couple of weeks be doing compassionate meditation and then start the mediation has an impact on how they deal with each other. And so the research hypothesis is that if they do that and they do it sincerely, that the mediation would be totally different and would be deeper and even probably in another kind of dimension of connection and solutions. So that could be setting the stage. I've once, and it's extremely interesting, I had one divorce case where I was mediator, where there had been accusations of violence. Our next session. The wife immediately said yes. The man said, I will think about it, and 3 days later he said, no, I don't want to do it. But that would have been, of course I couldn't force it, couldn't impose it, but I was praying, please let him say yes, because I am thinking and hoping that maybe if he had done it, and I had explained it what it was, and he was hesitating. He said, oh, maybe because compassionate meditation, you do it on your own. Well, with me or with I might be with Elizabeth. Then it's not that your wife is there. It's not that the enemy is there. It's one-on-one, and it's really a missed opportunity. But that would have been fabulous setting the stage. But unfortunately, I cannot report a success on that. Yes?
I'm not sure if it's like a comment or a question or a combination of the both, but of the two. But I think the first thing that comes to mind for me with mediation in a Australian context is how do you navigate a situation where, for example, in Zulu culture, the man is always, respected and the woman is always subservient and things like that. And then we have the constitution which gives you the right to culture and those kinds of things. And I mean, this African society is based on this diverseness, and we celebrate that. How, in the context of mediation, do we make sure that we don't stifle the continuous celebration of diversity and, exercising our cultural practices, etc., without, also stifling the victim's voice, for example, the woman that has to be subservient or whatever it is, maybe. Because I can hear when you speak about working out this power imbalance by bringing someone in who will be on the side of the women and everything like that. It's a good idea, and then I think about putting it in practice in a South African context where the man, yes, he's in the mediation voluntarily, but he's unwilling to unlearn his own cultural practices, that which makes him himself. And it's difficult, how do you navigate something like that?
Wow, hearing that is obviously confirming that I'm operating in an easy Western European and United States context. And that obviously, although I've done some stuff in China and the cultural elements are also very different, I think the only answer here is again empathy and even stronger compassion. And that means with empathy, the mediator will have to demonstrate the empathy to the man and to understand his perspective and where he comes from. And then one of the magic things that can happen in mediation is if you as a mediator, you have them together, you mirror a lot, but you also make them see and hear a lot of things. And so when I demonstrate empathy to the man, and he feels understood, and I will now demonstrate empathy to the wife, and try to see how that resonates with you. If you give empathy to the wife and she feels understood and she can, because that is a one-on-one with the wife where she talks and I would be doing active listening, inquiring, paraphrasing, acknowledging, and she would tell us, because the man is there, but she might, depending on the situation and how big the fear of the woman is, I might have her talk to me and not to him, and maybe second session to him. But with her being empowered to be listened to have all the empathy and to tell how she feels, how she sees it, it might ring a bell with the man. Because if you have given him the empathy and understood his perspective, and then asked, but she has a different perspective. And so, it's not about you are wrong or you are right, it's about that's a different perspective, and your wife has a different perspective and feelings, and there is then where you could hope that empathy brings then maybe the human connection of compassion. And very often it will not work. And then they will go to court, or if you're lucky to arbitration. Or what I would do in a situation like that, if I feel it doesn't work, I try then to see if I can help with evaluative mediation or some kind of arbitration to avoid them having to go to court. Like if there's clear, like for instance, but that is again in the European situation, if there's a clear legal argument to be made that dominant guy is wrong in planning that, I would ask permission of the parties if I can give my expert opinion. And then with that, I would kind of tell the guy, hey man, you'll never be able to pull this off in court. But that is obviously stepping outside the role of a facilitated mediator. But if I see that we are going nowhere and they will go to court, then I tell them, I'm very transparent. I say, look, I think this is not working. You may be going to court. You will lose a lot of time, energy, and money. What about I give you my opinion? And if it's in fields where you're an expert, I'm an expert in family property law, so I'm recognized for that in Belgium. So in the Belgian context, if the man would say, well, I want to check you out, he can call anyone, any lawyer. I would say, oh, okay, he's in the top in Belgium, so fine. That helps. But you're not in mediation. You're more in going to case settlement, which is fine, because I told you I am a conflict management scholar who wants to find the way to manage the conflict in the best possible way, to find a situation where they are better off than they were before. So I'm not dogmatic about mediation. I always bear in mind that if I start out as a mediator, that I should be facilitated, and every other move I make, I must be transparent and I must talk about it. Okay? I think we are going over time. There's 2 more questions. Can I take those?
Are you okay, or must somebody, maybe for transport or something, go immediately? Okay. So if you need to go, I'm so sorry about us going over, but we cannot let this chance go past to hear the last 2 questions. Thanks, Prof.
Don't go over because you can leave, right?
Yeah, exactly. Lovely, and we'll see you next week. I will send an email tomorrow for the discussion thing we will be having next week in the second part of the class. Okay, so whose question was it still?
Yeah, there were 2 questions there. Yeah, go ahead.
If there are a reasonable time frame for mediation, do the chances of success increase with increasing length?
Can you say that again? If there are?
Is a reasonable time frame for mediation?
A reasonable time frame?
Yeah, and if the chances of success decrease with increasing length of the process?
No, that the latter certainly not. They don't. You mean increase or decrease?
Decrease.
Decrease, certainly not. They may even increase because time is your friend. If there's you know, the situation of Amsterdam 10 years, I can be very proud to say I mediated and found an agreement in a lost case. But if I'm very honest, time was my friend. They were already fighting for 10 years. At some point, you get fed up with that. So in that sense, it helped. A reasonable time frame, that's a very good question. It's a process approach where you think about how many meetings would I need? You should be flexible. But to be honest, I have had not many cases where I couldn't close it, depending on the agenda of the parties and the lawyers, but I couldn't close it in 4 to 5 sessions. Could be sessions of half a day or of a full day, but I think I've never gone over 5 sessions, but longer than 2 hours, of course. I've had a really big conflict in a big company between the siblings and in Copenhagen, and we all flew in Zurich, and we were in a hotel at the airport, and we were 3 full days, and at the end of the last day there was a principled agreement that then has been further negotiated by all the lawyers all over the place for 2 more years under my supervision to then have a final deal in 2 years. So then you could say, what is the reasonable time frame? We had a principled agreement in 3 days, but there was such a complicated international case with so many elements of tax law and financial elements, and so it took then 2 more years. But in that 2 years there's also setting up of structures, of foundations, of trusts, the whole bunch. So I think, you should always be flexible, but on the other hand, I think it's a good question because your starting point, your attitude should be, we will be able to deal with this in a reasonable time. Mediation is not meant to be continuing. Therapy may be meant to be continuing, but mediation should not be. And also what you can do is I always tell parties, we go step by step. After every step we evaluate. After every session I ask, do you want to continue? How do you feel? Are there... That is important, that they can give their... and if I feel some stress, I may do a caucus. Caucuses, I always am transparent. I say, I will now talk to that party alone. Caucus is a big topic. I don't know if you will touch upon it, but it's a big topic in terms of confidentiality, in terms of multiple partiality. There's a lot to say about that. But again, I'm not dogmatic. I am flexible, but transparent, and try to be as honest as possible. So that means that it's a constant trial and error, but not guessing, but thinking and discussing what would be the best way to move now. Yes?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for your lecture. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
My question is, what can be done to make mediation more socially acceptable? I have the feeling that in Germany, for example, many parties prefer to argue in court. I think this is because there is often conflict behind the conflict, but people prefer to ignore it.
Very good question. I think you're absolutely right. We say always when we negotiate, there's many layers of negotiation, and there's always negotiations behind the table. You have the stakeholders, you have lots of people with interests. One thing is, why some people, and where there may be a general feeling or tendency not to mediate, for the parties, It means, because we say it's voluntary and you need to engage, it means being vulnerable. You need to be okay to be vulnerable. If you're not vulnerable, and mediation is often used as a trick, but then you would demask it. So vulnerability, that's what I say to machos, it takes a strong person to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is one of the most difficult things, because you need to show yourself and demask, and for that you need to be strong. So that's why I always congratulate parties when I start in the kickoff meeting of mediation. I say, congratulations, you have made an important step in trying to be a human being who connects and who tries to deal with disputes in a humane and as less harmful way as possible. And for that I congratulate you. I said it to the people of the Court of Amsterdam case, because even after 10 years of fight, finally they found the vulnerability. Maybe it was forced by the timing and the stress, but anyhow, they did it. And that you can celebrate. But I think one of the reasons is, and as I'm dealing a lot with big captains of industry, they have a huge ego, they are often have narcissistic features, and they hate to be vulnerable. So, like when I'm dealing with family conflicts, I often come in not as a mediator, not as a facilitator, but as a professor. And they just tell this guy, maybe talk to that professor. He has a lot of experience. And that's where then I can start to demonstrate empathy. And sometimes I manage to get them. Then another reason is attorneys. Attorneys are a pain in the process of human justice and social justice. They have a huge self-interest, and they are so arrogant to hide it under the excuse of zealous advocacy in the interest of the client. To be honest, as I tell you, I'm a private law, civil and commercial lawyer who's dealing with private clients, big companies, civil law, commercial law, company law, corporate law. There is, and I've been in the practice since 1988, so that's 37 years. I have, I think, in all these situations, never seen a case where it was in the interest of the client to go to court. Never. The cases where it might be in the interest of the client to go to court is maybe in IP cases, patent cases, where if they copy your patent all the time and you constantly negotiate, you don't scare them off, so you might need a judgment to stop it. But basically, in all the rest, it's about humans, about emotions, and the law is the shadow of the law that kind of defines the maneuvering room. But if you do that in a decent way, with respect, trying to find out what are the interests, respecting the law, and there's a lot of maneuvering room, finding a deal is always better. And so, always know, if you're a self-centered, egoistic person who doesn't care at all about the other and the relationship with the other, you might prefer to squeeze them out in court. And that is what happens sometimes also with parties. I've had one case where, in an inheritance case, the brother, he took everything, and I did a negotiation. It was not a mediation. And my clients were very vulnerable, and they wanted to get rid of it, and I said, this is not okay. He's kind of holding you hostage, and he didn't want to give concessions. And I told the clients, this was a case where I thought you should go to court. Because in court, you will get what you're entitled to, but they couldn't do it. They did not have the emotional energy. It was not about finance, because I said, this is so outrageous that I'm willing to do this on a lower fee and then take a success fee at the end. But you will not, and I told them it can take me 20 years. This is not fair. And still, they didn't want to do it, so I negotiated there the worst deal in my life, because they were happy with the deal, and I could get more, but this was not fair. This was not fairness. This was kind of blackmailing, and this guy, when I asked him, but don't you care for this, I was negotiator, not mediator, so I was party. Don't you care for the relationship with your brother and sisters? In a one-on-one, they were not there with his lawyer. He said, no, the hell with it. I want this, and I don't give more. But that's exceptional. I don't like the guy. I still don't like him. I know him, and I come across him often at social dinners and cocktail parties, and we talk to each other, but I really don't like him. He's absolutely not. He's not a good person. But that's my bias. Okay, well, I think we call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so